Two young women from the Netherlands went hiking in Panama. They were never seen alive again. What makes their story different from every other missing persons case is what happened after they disappeared. Because their phones, their camera, and the items found days later tell a story that doesn't make sense. The pictures they took in the darkness still have investigators baffled. The way their remains were scattered raises questions that have never been answered. The emergency calls they made, or tried to make, suggest something far more sinister than a simple hiking accident. This is the case of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. And even after a decade of investigation, nobody knows exactly what happened to them on that trail in Panama. This channel isn't about rumors. It's not about shock value. It's about evidence, and the moments where the truth begins to crack. I'm Webb, and if you're new here, subscribe and join us. We're building something serious, and your support allows us to research deeper, produce better, and uncover stories others overlook. Like, share, and be part of it. What we don't know is this. Their last days were a nightmare. Alone in the jungle, their water running low, their phones dying, making desperate calls for help that never connected, watching each other suffer, knowing nobody was coming. This video will walk you through every clue, every mystery, and the theories that try to explain the unexplainable. By the end, you'll understand why people still can't agree on what really happened, and why the official explanation doesn't match the evidence. Let's start with who they were. Kris Kremers was 21 years old. Lisanne Froon was 22. They met while working at a restaurant in the Netherlands. They became friends. Then Kris invited Lisanne to move into her student dorm. They were close. In 2014, they made a plan. A gap year. They'd save money, travel to South America, and volunteer with children. Kris had been to South America before with her family, so she suggested Panama. For over a year, they saved. They planned. Their friends and family donated money and supplies for the children they'd helped teach. They were excited. This was their chance to do something meaningful, to see the world, to have an adventure together. On March 15, 2014, they boarded a plane from Amsterdam. Their destination, Panama. They weren't thrill seekers. They weren't reckless. They were two young women with good intentions and a plan. They'd arrive in Boquete, a small mountain town. They'd volunteer at a school starting April 1st. They'd teach English. They'd explore. It was going to be the best month of their lives. Except, nothing went according to plan. When Kris and Lisanne arrived on March 29th, they were deflated. The school they'd been invited to volunteer at turned them away. The administrators said the school couldn't accommodate them until the following week. All their plans, all their excitement, pushed back 7 days. Lisanne texted her parents, "I am really very disappointed." They had a week to kill in a small Panamanian town. So they contacted their host family, Miriam Guara, who ran a guest house. What activities did she recommend? Miriam suggested some hikes, some sightseeing, tours of local coffee plantations. The girls made a list. By Tuesday, April 1st, they'd already hiked a volcano, already toured a coffee plantation. They were running out of ideas. So they decided to hike the Pianista Trail. It was a popular path. Local people walked their dogs there. It should be safe. It should be easy. They'd be back before dinner. They told their host family they were going for a walk around town. But they texted their friends they were going hiking. They dressed in tank tops and shorts. They packed light. A single water bottle. Some snacks. Their phones. Their camera. They weren't planning to be out long. Around 1:30 p.m., a taxi dropped them off at the trailhead. That's the last confirmed sighting of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon alive. When they didn't come home that evening, their host family wasn't immediately alarmed. They were young. Maybe they were just out late having fun. But the next day, April 2nd, the girls missed an appointment with a tour guide. The guide called. The host family confirmed the girls had never come home. The tour guide called the Spanish school. The school called the girls' parents in the Netherlands. The school called the police. The search didn't begin until April 3rd. By then, Kris and Lisanne had been missing for almost 48 hours. A reward was offered. $30,000. A 10-day search was launched. Volunteers from the area. Police. Investigators. Helicopters. Dogs. Nothing. 10 weeks passed. 10 weeks of silence. 10 weeks of Kris and Lisanne's parents wondering if their daughters were alive, if they were suffering, if they were ever coming home. And then, finally, a break. A local woman walked up to the police station in Boquete. She was holding something. A blue backpack. She said she found it on the bank of a river near Alto Romero. That location was nearly 5 miles from the Pianista Trail, over 10 miles from where Kris and Lisanne were staying. The backpack was quickly identified as Lisanne's. The woman said she had been to that same location just the day before. The backpack wasn't there then. It must have washed up overnight, carried by the river. But when investigators arrived and examined the backpack, something was wrong. It was dry. After 10 weeks in a humid rainforest. After heavy rains for months. After supposedly being carried miles by a river. The backpack was completely dry. It looked brand new. The contents of the backpack raised even more questions. Inside were 2 bras, neatly folded 2 pairs of sunglasses, a water bottle, 2 cell phones, a digital camera, Lisanne's passport, Kris's medical insurance card, a small amount of money, but not inside. A compass, a solar power bank, a knife, the room key. Why would they bring one person's passport and one person's insurance card? Why were the bras neatly folded in a backpack that had supposedly been in a rainforest river for 10 weeks? Why would they not have a knife, a compass, or supplies for survival? Where was the room key? They needed to get back into their accommodations. Most importantly, how was this backpack dry? The dry backpack was confusing, but it was nothing compared to what investigators would find when they plugged in the phones. The phones told a story that was deeply disturbing. On April 1st, at 4:30 p.m., someone tried to call 112. That's the Dutch emergency number. It should divert to local services in Panama. The call didn't connect. They tried 911. That should also divert to local services. It didn't connect either. Then the phones turned off. They stayed off for more than 14 hours. On April 2nd, at 7 a.m., the call started again. Every 1 to 2 hours, someone was trying to dial 112 or 911. Nearly 80 calls in total. But here's what's disturbing. Only one of those calls connected. Just one. It was early morning on April 2nd. For just a moment. Then the call dropped. Then the phones turned off again. This time for 19 hours. The pattern repeated on April 3rd, calls every few hours. None connecting. By April 4th, the calls are less frequent. Farther apart. By April 5th, Lisanne's phone died. Kris's phone kept going. Being turned on. Attempts to call. Turned off again. But something changed. Up until April 5th, whoever was using Kris's phone knew the PIN. They entered it correctly. Every single time. Then on April 6th, something happened. Someone started entering wrong PINs. Over and over. Dozens of attempts. All wrong. Why would someone suddenly forget the PIN they'd been using for days? Here's the theory that made investigators' blood run cold. Kris knew her own PIN. So Kris was using her phone to call for help. But on April 6th, Kris was no longer able to use the phone. Which means Kris was probably already dead or dying. And someone else, someone who didn't know the PIN, was desperately trying to unlock her phone. Who would do that? Why would someone need to unlock Kris's phone if not to call for help? The only answer that makes sense, Lisanne. Lisanne, alone and desperate, trying to unlock her friend's phone to call for help. Entering wrong codes. Over and over. Failing. Trying again. Finally giving up. Kris's phone would be turned on and off a few more times. Wrong pins entered. All wrong. The battery getting lower and lower. By April 11th, the phone died and was never turned on again. Lisanne had used up the last battery trying to get help, and the help never came. But the phones weren't the only devices telling a story. The girls had brought a digital camera, a Canon SX270HS. Every photo was time-stamped. The first pictures, April 1st, before 1:30 p.m. Normal stuff. Lisanne smiling at the summit. Kris smiling at the summit. Selfies. Waterfalls. Scenery. They look happy. They look healthy. They look alive. Then at 2 p.m., the pictures change. There's a photo of Kris taken from behind. She's in a gully surrounded by moss-covered rocks and thick vegetation. She looks worried. Not smiling. Her expression serious. Her pose awkward. A few more photos of Kris. Each one she looks less happy. More serious. More strained. Then the investigators noticed something. Photos had been deleted from the camera. In all their trip to Panama, this was the first time they had deleted anything. Why would they delete photos now? What was on those deleted photos? After 2 p.m. on April 1st, no more pictures for 7 days. 7 days of silence. Then on April 8th, everything changes. On April 8th, at 1 a.m. in the morning, someone turned on the camera. Between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m., they took over 90 photographs. These photos are haunting. They're of nothing specific. Just darkness, illuminated by the camera's flash. Jungle, rocks, dirt paths. the sky, a plant. Over and over. The angles are disorienting. The perspective is strange. It's impossible to tell if the photographer was standing, sitting, or lying down. The direction the camera was pointing is unclear. Some photos appear to be attempts to use the flash as a light. But a camera flash in pitch darkness would blind you, not help you see. Other photos are harder to explain. One photo appears to show the back of Kris's head, with a hint of blood in her hair. Several photos show strange light orbs, light artifacts that don't make sense. What were these photos? Theory 1. Lisanne was trying to use the flash to signal for help. Maybe she was hoping rescue helicopters would see the light. Theory 2. Someone was forcing them to take photos. Someone was holding the camera and making them pose. Theory 3. Lisanne was documenting their location. She was trying to leave evidence of where they were so rescue would find them. Theory 4. Lisanne was delirious. She was disoriented and confused, snapping random pictures in a daze. But here's what we know. These photos were taken between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. in the pitch darkness, after days with no food or water, and they suggest something was very, very wrong. After the backpack was found, investigators searched the river and surrounding area more thoroughly. Over the course of weeks, they found remains, scattered along the same river where Lisanne's backpack turned up. In total, 33 bones, a pair of jean shorts, one shoe from each girl. But the most disturbing discovery, Lisanne's left foot, still inside her boot. The laces still cinched tight. The cut that severed her ankle from her leg was clean. Too clean. There was no blood, which suggested it happened after Liz and was already dead. Nearby, investigators found a piece of Lisanne's skin. It had been rolled into a ball. They also found half of a pelvic bone, identified as Kris's. The remains were scattered. Some of Kris's bones had been picked clean and bleached by the sun. Lisanne's remains showed less decomposition. Nothing about the remains explained what happened, but everything about the remains raised questions. The official theory is that Kris and Lisanne fell. Maybe they fell from a monkey bridge. That's a flimsy bridge made of 3 wires that crosses a ravine. It's technically accessible to hikers, but it's dangerous. The theory goes, Kris fell first. Fell from the bridge or while climbing. She couldn't get back up. She was injured and immobilized. Lisanne stayed with her. They tried calling for help. No reception. Over and over, they tried. Kris died on April 5th or 6th. Lisanne didn't know the pin to Kris's phone. She couldn't call anyone. By April 8th, Lisanne was disoriented. She was desperate. She started taking pictures of the darkness, maybe trying to signal rescuers, maybe using the flash as a light. Finally, on April 11th, Kris's phone died. Lisanne was alone, dehydrated, malnourished, injured. She hiked away from Kris's body. She died somewhere along the river. The current carried her remains downstream. It was a tragic accident. 2 young women who went hiking on an unmarked trail and didn't come back. But this theory has problems. There is no evidence that Kris and Lisanne ever made it to the monkey bridge. Locals say it's very difficult to get lost on this trail. There are well-marked paths, network of trails, easy to navigate. People who knew the girls said they would never be stupid enough to attempt a dangerous crossing on their own. So how did they fall? The photos taken in the early morning hours of April 8th don't look like someone trying to find their way out of a gully. They look like something else. Something that suggests distress beyond what hunger and dehydration would cause. And the backpack? How did it end up dry after supposedly being in a rainforest river for 10 weeks? Why were the bras folded so neatly? Who deleted those photos? Why did Kris's phone suddenly have someone trying to unlock it with wrong pins? If Lisanne was desperate to call for help, she would have called her parents, her boyfriend, not just emergency services over and over. Unless she couldn't call anyone. Unless someone had taken the phone from her. There's another theory. What if Kris and Lisanne didn't fall? What if they were taken? They were 2 young, small women in a foreign country. They didn't speak the language fluently. They were vulnerable. Easy targets. What if someone saw them on the trail and realized how vulnerable they were? What if they were taken off the trail, held somewhere? The person holding them would know they'd try to call for help. So maybe they let them keep their phones, knowing there was no reception deep in the jungle. Maybe one of the girls got a picture of their captor on the camera, so he deleted it. Maybe Kris tried to fight back. Maybe she was hurt in a struggle. And Kris died first. Not from a fall, from something else. Then Lisanne was alone with whoever was holding her. She was desperately trying to unlock Kris's phone. Not to call emergency services, but to call someone. Anyone. The person holding her wouldn't let her. The photos taken at 1 to 4 a.m. on April 8th? Maybe those weren't Liz and trying to signal rescuers. Maybe those were photos being taken with the camera being held up. Maybe someone was forcing them to pose, forcing them to be photographed. Or maybe the pictures were the only thing Liz and could do to document where she was, so someone would find her. The person holding them needed the backpack to leave the scene clean, so they took it. They removed most of the supplies. They even took the knife and compass so the girls couldn't use them to escape or defend themselves. They drove it miles away, to the river. They threw it in hoping it would be washed downstream. Never found, but it washed back up. After they were done with Kris and Lisanne, they scattered their remains. Some in the river, some along the banks. They were hoping the remains would be so scattered and so decomposed that nobody would ever figure out what happened. This theory explains more of the evidence than the accident theory, but it's also more terrifying. The truth is, we may never know exactly what happened to Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. The evidence doesn't support any single theory completely. But we know this. Their last days were a nightmare. Alone, scared, trying desperately to call for help, watching each other suffer. Whether they fell, whether they were taken, whether they were hunted, we know they died young, far from home, without anyone being able to save them. And we know there are still questions that have never been answered. If you think you know what happened, the comments are open. But be respectful. These are real people whose families are still grieving. And if you want to learn about other mysteries that have never been solved, I've linked more videos in the description. Thanks for watching.